say, I would really like for you all to give a warm welcome to Dr. David Brown, who's going to say a few words about our speaker today.
So I get the joy of doing the small exhibit at the beginning. Emphasis on trying to keep this relatively short because I have to say I could talk about Colleen for an hour. Not only the kindness and the friendship that she's shared with me over the years, but also just the fact that you know when somebody is smarter than you, and then you just try to keep them around as long as possible because you might just learn something from the occasion. I was lucky that Colleen ended up hanging out with us way back in 2009 for a couple of days over a summer. I would say probably caught a bit of an archaeology bug at that time. At the very least, got to go ahead and get to know the Fairfield Foundation a little bit. Something that would certainly grow and grow and grow and continue for years to come. We've gotten to see Colleen not only do exceptionally well as an undergraduate at William & Mary. I got to continue to work with her there and provide support where hopefully she needed it most. And when she moved on to get her master's and PhD from the University of Chapel Hill, North Carolina at Chapel Hill, got to see her work with one of my mentors and see the amazing difference that she could make not only in our community here in Gloucester, but also in the lives of so many people that she brought to Gloucester from North Carolina. So she has always been building bridges between groups, always been leading with kindness and enthusiasm and passion, and always teaching. And so I'm personally just excited to see the lecture today, having been around and listened to a lot of what she's taught about this in the past. I know I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to enjoy it, and I can't tell you how proud of her that we all are, and excited to see what comes next. So without further ado, Dr. Colleen Betti.
I hope, can you all hear me okay? Yes. All right. As Dave said, my name is Colleen Betti. I'm an archaeologist. I currently work up in Fredericksburg, but went to college at William & Mary, which is where I first began to be involved in research in Gloucester, while working with the Fairfield Foundation. I went to grad school at UNC Chapel Hill, and my dissertation ended up looking at the history and archaeology of 3 black schoolhouses in Gloucester: Woodville, Bethel, and Glenn's Dragon. And so this book actually came out as a side project as part of my dissertation. I ended up with so many historical documents about the 3 schools that I was looking at, along with other schools in the county, and was trying to figure out a way to organize all that information in a visual and linear way so that I could better understand the history of the schools without going crazy looking at icons in a file folder like this one. I had come across this open source visual timeline maker called Timeline.js that had been developed by Northwestern University in the past, and decided to see if I could use that to help me organize all of this historical material. And well, it worked. I started with Woodville, Bethel, and Glenn's Dragon, and then kept expanding. During the COVID lockdown, the Fairfield Foundation and I collaborated, and they started posting some of these timelines for various schools on their Facebook page. Eventually, I had a timeline for most of the historic public schools created, and needed a way to organize them. And that is when I pulled together a story map of all the schools in Gloucester with timelines attached. And after I made this story map website, Bill Lawrence approached me about turning the story map into a book. And I definitely didn't have time then, since I was writing my dissertation and that was taking up all of my free time. So I told him to contact me after I graduated, and he did, and I still really didn't have time because I was starting a new job. So what we ended up doing was having Evan from the Fairfield Foundation, right back there, transform the story map into a book. And he did an absolutely amazing job, as hopefully you all will see. And that leads us to today and the current book. So I have to say, I pulled together all the information, and Evan did all the amazing formatting. So thank you to him. So what I'm going to talk to you all about today is all of the various sources that were used to find the information in the book, and then take a more in-depth look at 2 of the schools and kind of go through their history. So the first place I started was with the clerk's office at the new courthouse. Using the grantor-grantee indexes that they have, I was able to locate all of the available deeds involving the school board. Because either the grantor or the grantee would have school board as in the name, so they're fairly easy to find. When the public school system in Gloucester was founded in 1871, there were 3 different school districts that operated independently from one another: Abingdon, Pettsworth, and Ware. They merged in 1922. So before 1922, I had to look for each of the individual school boards purchasing or selling property, and then after 1922 for the Gloucester County School Board. The second part of the record search in the clerk's office was looking through plat books for any plats involving the school board. I ended up with 92 deeds from the school board purchasing property between 1871 and 1960, 84 deeds from the school board selling property between 1871 and 1955, and to be clear, not every property that they purchased, I was able to find a deed for them selling, even if they don't own it today, and sometimes they were selling land that we didn't have a deed for them purchasing, so there's not all the deeds are in the courthouse. In addition, there are 58 plats, although some of the plats were of the same property. And the problem with a lot of the plats and the deeds is they had no school names attached to them and only vague locational information. So we really didn't know where a lot of these were. So when you go, you can see in here, I have things highlighted. The ones in blue, we were able to figure out where they were located. The ones that are still in white, we still don't know what property that is referring to. So then it was time to turn to maps. We're very lucky that Gloucester has 2 historic school maps. Not all counties have that. One is a map some of you all may be familiar with, the 1912 Folks map. This one gets used quite a lot because it's a great map from 1912 that shows many things, including the location of 20 white and 20 black schools. But again, it doesn't give their names. It does, however, show how many teachers each school had, as well as if it was a white school or a black school, which is useful information. Then there's the Franklin map, which is from 1885, and we have copies of 2 out of the 3 portions of this map, those from Ware and Pettsworth districts. Abingdon is unfortunately missing, although it did once exist. Now, this was a very informative map, as it not only gives how many rooms in the school, but for some of them it gives the name of the school. Not all of them, but some of them. And the school number. In the 19th century, schools were given numbers by the school district in Gloucester and were sometimes referred to as white school number 2 or colored school number 4 instead of their name. The names were often community given rather than school board given. The school board used the numbers for organization. So having this map listing both the numbers along with their location was great, at least for Ware and Pettsworth. Finally, we have USGS topographic maps, which show school locations and sometimes names. Unfortunately, they only started marking schools after 1906. And while we have maps made in 1917 for the western half of Gloucester, and 1916 and 1917 for the northern part of the county, the part of the county west of Route 17 and south of Woods Crossroads did not have an updated map made between 1906 and 1953. And so no schools were marked on those topographic maps. This leaves a portion of the county, the western part of Abingdon District, where the only school map is the Folks map. The next set of records I looked at was the Gloucester County School Board minutes. These are available by appointment at the school board office for anyone who wants to look. So as I said earlier, Gloucester originally had 3 school boards until 1922. Each of them had their own minutes. However, we only have the Ware District minutes from 1871 to 1922, and the Abingdon District minutes from 1921 to 1922. All of the Pettsworth minute books and the 1871 to 1921 Abingdon District minute books are either missing or no longer exist. Pages from the Ware minutes from 1919 to 1922 were found in a private collection a few years ago in the county. So the chance of finding more always exists because sometimes the board members would take copies of the minutes home. So someone out there might have some of these sitting in their attic. The school board minutes were, of course, a treasure trove of information, especially the Ware District minutes from the earlier period. It lists every school name, number, every teacher hired, how much each teacher was paid, all the costs and improvements made to each schoolhouse, etc. Unfortunately, the quantity of information slowed down over the years, and the later post-1922 minutes do not always list the teachers hired in association with the schools. So they would give a list of these are the teachers hired for this school year, but not say what school they were teaching at necessarily. And they also tend to focus more on the white schools, and specifically the white high schools, rather than the black schools or the elementary schools. So the information included can be rather biased. So we have a lot on Achilles and a lot on Botetourt and somewhat on Hayes Store High School and a lot less on all the rest of the schools in the county from the minutes. However, they do provide information on when schools closed, opened, were modified, etc. Once I went through all the school board minutes, I had a pretty good sense of all the schools in the county from 1922 onwards and where they were located. Although there's still deeds and plats that I've not been able to associate it with a specific school, either because they're in Abingdon and Petsworth from an earlier date, or of no specific spatial descriptions. I then went to the Gloucester Museum and looked at the school records they have. They have a number of very interesting collections, including a set of school board bills from the 1920s, teacher applications from 1922 and 1928, lists of books for indigent children, surveys of children out of school on why they were out of school, teacher attendance lists from the late 1920s and early 1930s, and a list of teachers from the 1924 to 1925 school year. These mostly provide information on teachers as well as how many classrooms each school had. However, the bills were very interesting because they included numerous improvements to the school buildings, how fuel was being procured for the schools, which was typically that the parents provided it, and then they would send a bill to the school board to reimburse them, and some equipment that was being purchased. The teacher records applications were interesting because, well, we don't actually know who was hired for 1922 and 1928 because these are just the applications. They had to list where they were teaching in previous years. So we were able to use that to find out where teachers were teaching prior to 1922 or prior to 1928, depending on the application. Those were all the records that I was able to look at in person because I was doing this research between 2019 and 2022. So obviously you all know what was going on in the world in the middle of that. And while I had originally planned to head to the Gazette Journal offices to look at the newspapers in person, I could not because during COVID I was not permitted to leave North Carolina for anything associated with my graduate studies because I had grant money through the university, and all state employees, which I counted as, were not allowed to leave the state for any work-related purposes. So I was able to get copies of the paper on microfilm through interlibrary loan instead. And I sat in the basement of the library at UNC for a few weeks and went through all of the issues on microfilm. However, I'm going to discuss that later because it was one of the last sets of records I looked at and one of the most detailed and informative. So I had other interesting online databases and sources to look at. One of these was a book published by Hampton University in 1893 that contains letters that graduates had sent back to the university as updates on their lives. A good portion of these graduates were teaching in Gloucester, and their letters provided details on the schools they were teaching at. Some interesting tidbits included how many children were in each school, how the temperance movement was going on at each school, the fact that black teachers were also teaching Sunday school and night schools in the public schoolhouses, and how crowded the schools were at this point in time. Hampton University also provided another set of very useful knowledge through their newsletter, The Southern Workman. This newsletter included additional letters from teachers back to Hampton, as well as other articles detailing visits by Hampton officials to Gloucester schools, and even some histories and biographies of a few Gloucester teachers, most notably T.C. Walker. These were a valuable source of information on teachers and school conditions from the 19th century through about the 1930s. In a similar vein, I was able to get scanned copies of the Gloucester Letter and Gloucester Messenger, which were newsletters from the Gloucester Agriculture and Industrial Institute that were published between 1888 and 1900. Those are now available online and searchable through the Library of Virginia. However, at the time, Bobby Ray was able to get the Library of Virginia to scan them for the Woodville board, and I was able to get a copy of them through her. So these were an absolute wealth of knowledge on black schools in the county in the late 19th century. While focused on the private high school at the time, it was the only black high school in Gloucester and had a very close relationship with the public elementary schools. So there are updates from the various schools, as well as lists of donations raised by public school students for the Gloucester Agricultural and Industrial Institute. These newsletters give us some insight into how the black schools in Abington district at the time, which we don't really have other information on because of all the missing maps and records. And one article in particular told of a traveling library that went out from the high school to the various elementary schools, and another told of mothers' meetings being held at a certain elementary school. So things that we would never know about without these newspaper articles. Other sources of information found online included the American Missionary newsletters, which gave similar information to the Gloucester Letter and Messenger. The Cooperative Education Association of Virginia Annual Report in 1926 gave us a listing of activities in various Gloucester schools. The Virginia Journal of Education included updates from each county superintendent every year. And while most of these updates were one short sentence kind of things, there was a few full-page articles, including one on how the community around Cache achieved a new high school in 1913. William and Mary had a very interesting attendance book from the Robin's Neck White School from 1886, which is one of the pages is pictured up there showing all the students and their attendance every month. In 1893, the Virginia School Journal listed all of the teachers in the county by district, although unfortunately not their school name, but that still gives us a great early list of teachers and how many schools were in each school district. There's also a page on Gloucester in the Virginia Teachers Directory from 1900, also showing all the teachers' names. Although it unfortunately listed teachers by where they lived rather than where they taught, which are not always the same. And then finally, every year, the Virginia Department of Education publishes an annual report. They still do this today. These reports are full of useful information from about 1871 through 1910, because after that they get a lot more general. During the 19th century, they included lists of every grade at school, but not schools that were one room with no grades. So you only got put on this list if you had more than one grade in the school, not the one-room schools. And these list the principal, the school's name, the post office it was closest to, if it was a white or black school, if it was public or private, the number of students enrolled, how many teachers were there, how many grades there were, average daily attendance, and the length of the school year. Other county-wide statistics were given, including how many classrooms there were in the county, how many school-age children there were total in the county, how many students were enrolled in school across the county, because not all students had to be in school at the time, it wasn't mandated, and various other statistics. One year they went over sanitation in schools, including how many classrooms had individual cups to drink out of versus shared cups. The number was very low in Gloucester, where sharing cups was still the norm at that point. So now I'm going to jump back to newspapers. I was able to use online digitized copies of the Southside Sentinel from Middlesex and a few years of the Matthews Journal to find information on Gloucester schools early on. This was some of my first newspaper sources I came across. These included updates on who the teacher were for various schools, outbreaks of illness, entertainments given at the schools, and honor rolls. The Southside Sentinel in particular went back to 1899 and had frequent updates on Gloucester schools from the northern part of the county. A few 19th century Gloucester newspapers, or rather the few issues that survived from these 19th century Gloucester newspapers, were available online through William and Mary, including the Gloucester Herald, the Tidewater Liberal, the Gloucester Mail, the Gloucester Tribune, and the Tidewater Virginian. And they did have some school news in a few surviving issues. There's like only one or two issues of each of these surviving. The Northern Neck News, the Virginia Gazette, the Richmond Times Dispatch, and the Richmond Planet had other occasional updates into the early 20th century. The New York Age, a black newspaper from New York City, had a regular column on Gloucester news in the 1930s for their readers who had migrated from Gloucester to New York City. And there were some wonderful pieces of school news in there, because schools were some of the things that were most regularly updated on in this local news, along with like weddings and things like that. Otherwise, the majority of the school news articles from 1919 onwards came from the Gloucester Gazette and later the Gloucester Matthews Gazette Journal and the Daily Press. Because I was looking at the Gloucester Gazette and Gazette Journal on microfilm, this meant reading through every single page, looking for any mention of the schools rather than using an online search like a lot of the other papers. Thankfully, due to the way the papers was organized, school news was largely on only a handful of the pages, and I was able to read through only those. Often the early issues were only about 4 pages long, and school news was on 1 of 2 pages, so not too terrible. I searched from 1919 through 1957, as those were the years I was given on microfilm. The Daily Press was available online through newspapers.com, so I was able to do keyword searches on there. I ended up with thousands of news articles from all these papers, just under 4,400 to be precise. But they give an amazing insight into what was going on in the schools. There was obviously a bias towards the white schools in the Southside Sentinel, Gloucester Gazette, and Gloucester Matthews Gazette Journal and Daily Press until the later end of the period I was looking at. The black schools were only rarely discussed outside of a small column in the Gazette Journal called Among the Colored. There was also a bias towards the larger white schools, especially the high schools at Achilles and Botetourt, which is a theme through all of these records. But the newspaper articles provided a wonderful look into what was going on at the local level. They detailed the development of school leagues into the more modern PTAs, fundraising for new school buildings, the various social events that occurred at the schools, and teacher names. One of the more interesting events only chronicled in the newspapers was the rise of the Gloucester School Improvement League in the late 1930s and early 1940s. This was a collaboration between both black and white parents in the county who were tired of the leadership of Superintendent Walter Kenny, believing that the schools were falling apart and he wasn't doing enough to modernize them. Their meetings and inquiry made by the Board of Supervisors into the situation were documented in detail in the Gazette and Gazette Journal, along with many letters to the editor from local citizens on both sides of the debate. This was a very, very heated debate at the time, and it is not mentioned once in the school board minutes, interestingly enough. While the group seemed to be gaining a lot of support and momentum in 1940 and 1941, all efforts were stopped with the outbreak of World War II, and Kenny remained superintendent for another decade. So that's where most of my information came from. And it's now time to kind of talk about another source of information that is not written, the photographs. We're lucky in Gloucester to have a few really amazing sources of photographs. Some that were used have been collected by the Historical Society, are available in the County History Museum, or printed in the Gazette Journal at a later time. And then others were from a few very specific collections of photographs, and those specific collections provide the bulk of the photographs. The first is the Jackson Davis collection, which is held at the University of Virginia. Jackson Davis was the state agent for Negro rural schools in Virginia from 1910 until 1915, and then the General Education Board's field agent in the South from 1915 through the 1920s or 1930s. I'm not exactly sure the end of his position there. As part of these jobs, he traveled around Virginia and the South, taking notes and photographs of schools. This included a number of visits to Gloucester. 2 of these visits are documented in his journal from 1911, which is another great textual resource on the school's names, locations, teachers, student counts, and daily activities. Importantly, though, he also took photographs of these schools and other places he visited on his trip. He returned to Gloucester a few times, and we have a series of photographs he took around 1921 and 1923, in addition to those from 1911. In total, we have 32 photographs of Gloucester schools from Jackson Davis. These photographs sometimes include just the schoolhouse, but many others show all the students and the teachers standing outside their school. And there's one that actually shows the students working inside the school, which is pretty rare. Both black and white schools were photographed. Most of the photographs were not labeled with a school name, but using his journal, the identity of most of the schoolhouses can be identified because he said how many students there were in each school the day he took the photographs. So you can pretty much count the students and match up which photograph belongs to each school, which is pretty handy. The next collection is from the National Archives and contains 133 photographs taken in 1947 as part of an NAACP civil rights lawsuit brought against the Gloucester County School Board by a group of black parents in the county. The case is known as Alice Lorraine Ashley et al. Versus the School Board of Gloucester County and J. Walter Kenny. If you remember that and search that, all the photographs are available on the National Archives website. These photographs capture the interior and exterior of both black and white schools, showing empty classrooms as well as classrooms full of students. This collection means we have a photograph of almost every classroom and student in Gloucester in 1947. I believe there are only 2 small black schools, James Store and Beach Hill, that were open at the time that are not included in these photographs. They only had a handful of students in those classrooms. As the photographs were evidence photos, they're an amazing record of the physical condition of the schools, including places like bathrooms and outhouses that are not usually photographed, but we have them in this collection. Other notable sets of photographs include the Lee Brown insurance photos, which were from around 1950 and are very high quality photographs of the outside of the schoolhouses in the county. Fisk University used to have low quality and watermark photographs of all Rosenwald schools in the county, including at least one schoolhouse that was replaced by a Rosenwald school. That's the only photo we have of that school. However, the website has been down for refurbishing for the past year because they got some awesome grant to redo the website, and it's unclear when it will be back up, but at some point it will be back up. There is also a series of schoolhouse photographs in the Gloucester History Museum from the early 20th century or 19th century. However, as far as I'm aware, they are not labeled. Some are identifiable due to other photographs of the same schools, but many are small one-room schools that are unidentified. Despite not knowing which schools they are a valuable record of what one-room schoolhouses looked like in the county. And one thing we can see through these photos is a lot of the schools in Gloucester were built with this very specific feature on the roofs. The sides of the roofs, they go down like this and then come in like this, and I don't know enough about architecture to know what that is called, but it is a feature that you see on a lot of the school photographs that seems to be common across the county. One last source of photos was the 1937 to 1938 Botetourt Journal Memory Book, which included not only photos of Botetourt classes, but of all the small elementary schools as well. So these are generally the sources that I used for my research. I'm probably missing one or two other small sources, but these were at least the main ones. So now I'm going to show what this looks like when you pull it all together. First, there's a total of 91 schools, of which we know the location of 78. So this map up here only shows 78 because some of the schools we know they existed, but we don't know where they are, so they can't be put on a map. They are all public schools. Some of them are multiple versions of the same school, such as when the school relocated to a different building, like the Cash School and the Bethel School both did 3 times. Private schools, despite being important to the county, were not included as my focus was on the public schools. Additionally, while this book includes modern schools, only detailed timelines were included for schools prior to 1951. 1951 was chosen as it's the point when the last of Gloucester's small elementary schools were closed with the opening of T.C. Walker. So after that, there were no more like 1, 2, 3, 4 room schools. Everything was just the larger schools. Some of the schools are only known through a single mention, such as the Angel Visit School, whose only mention is a newspaper article from 1844. Others, such as Achilles, Botetourt, and the Gloucester County Training School, have such huge historical records that we had to only include the most interesting and pertinent to the book, so it was not literally 1,000 pages long. There are thousands and thousands of mentions of these schools because they were the big high schools. There are, most of the schools, however, in this book have every mention that I could find in the historical record included. The exceptions are really just the big high schools. There are still a few sources I've not been able to access that could be added later. For example, there are 25 boxes of T.C. Walker's papers at Hampton University, along with 10 boxes of teacher letters that no doubt have information on Gloucester schools, but I was unable to access them due to archives closures from COVID. And now I'm working full-time, so don't have the 3 weeks it's estimated it would take to go through them, 3 weeks full-time. And only recently, a collection donated to William & Mary was noted to have records of teacher pay from across the county in 1872. But I've not been able to go see those yet, and that probably has some really good information on Abington. So if anyone ever has time to go look, please let me know. I am going to go through 2 schools to show how all of this pulls together into a timeline and historical narrative. The first is the Glenn's Dragon School, a black school that was open from 1883 until 1929 up near Glenn's. It's one of the schools I looked at for my dissertation, so I know a lot about this one. But it is also a really interesting case because of how long it existed, but how rarely it was mentioned in the historical record later in its history. We know more about it early on than later on. Second is the Royal Oak or Cash School, a white school, which is technically 3 schools that were in existence from 1878 until 1927, including one of the county's first high schools. Oh, sorry, there's Glenn's Dragon, and there's Cash. So the Glenn's Dragon School. It took a while to figure out that the Glen School and the Dragon School were the same school. because it was known both as the Dragon School and the Glens Colored School during its existence, with Dragon being more common earlier on and Glens being more common later on, but with some overlap. The first record of the school is the deed of purchase by the Petsworth District School Board in 1883. They purchased it from Thomas J. Clopton, containing 1 acre and 5/16 of an acre on the road leading from Dragon Ordinary to New Upton, now Glens Road, where Vernon Palmer had lived until he died. The school is shown on the 1885 Franklin map 2 years later as Colored School Number 5 with 1 room. The early history of the school is very luckily recorded in 2 letters in the book 22 Years' Work of the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute. The first is a letter from teacher James Jarvis. He said, quote, "In '85, I was assigned to take charge of a school numbering about 40, near the boundary line between Gloucester and Middlesex counties. The people have enjoyed the privilege of a free school for only 2 years previous to the time I took charge. Therefore, they were very illiterate. Not more than 4 of my pupils could write their name. They did not even know the name of the state they lived in. The older people cared little about schools. So my aim was to teach them their use, and that it was also necessary to have a school on Sunday called Sunday School. Being very religious, they all approved of that. I purchased for them books necessary for the purpose and commenced the work. And when I left, they were able to take care of the work themselves. I have heard since then they were progressing splendidly and have more than 50 regular attendants. When I left in April '85, 27 of my scholars could write letters and read letters. Most of them could do addition, subtraction, and multiplication. My aim was to teach them to read, write, and spell and numbering, and the school was complimented by the superintendent for their success. So while the school was never identified by name in this letter, thanks to the 1885 Franklin map, we know it's the only black school near the boundary line between Gloucester and Middlesex County, and the founding date of 1883 matches up with 2 years before 1885, as mentioned in the letter. The next year, Lizzie Baytock was assigned to the Dragon School after having previously taught at the Bethel School. She described her time as, quote, "Things went on this way for 2 years when I was sent to another school in the county called the Dragon School. Here was plenty of work to be done. The people were less advanced, most of them renting and living in uncomfortable houses. The church was far away. They were trying to have a Sunday school, and I worked at it to the best of my ability. In the course of 2 years, it became quite prosperous. It was largely attended by the old people. When it was too cold for the children to come, poorly clad as they were, I would have a class made up of mostly gray-haired men. I used to visit the people. I tried to impress upon them the necessity of having good homes. I don't know as my talk did any good, but during my stay there, many purchased land and commenced building respectable frame houses. Some of them finished their houses when I left. The tall and extensive woods which once grew on the Dragon are gradually giving way to well-cultivated fields, and frame houses are taking place of log cabins. For these people, I can say they are coming." So from her letter, you can see that teachers were often doing more than just literally teaching elementary school kids how to read and write and math at this time. They were very big community advocates and working with all ages and communities. We then learned that in 1889, a woman named Frances Lee was the teacher at Glens. She appears to have had continued teaching there for a while, as in 1891, the school donated $1 for a tree for the Gloucester Agricultural and Industrial Institute. And again in 1892, they donated 4 sheets. Miss Lee wrote a letter to the Gloucester Letter in 1892 describing the school, saying, quote, "I began my first term October 1st, 1889 with 7 pupils, and closed at the end of 6 months with 35. The second term, I made a better beginning and a better ending. At the end of 3 successive and I hope successful terms, I closed with 52 pupils. I take great delight in teaching, for I want to do something in the name of Jesus and for the good of my race. It has been my aim to carry out the plans of the school board, and by the help of the Lord have succeeded very well, and have gotten on nicely with my pupils, parents, and friends. My work has not ended in the public schoolrooms, but I teach in the Sunday school and try to be helpful in a general way. The children are interested in the Gloucester School and often bring pennies for it. We have not organized a missionary society yet, but hope to do so another year." So if you note, she said that there were 52 pupils in this one-room school. They donated 65 cents in May 1893 and $1 in December 1893. In April of 1895, Miss Lee led closing exercises at the school before leaving for Philadelphia to learn dressmaking. The notice stated that, quote, the children of her school brought quite a good number of books during the past term, and at the closing collected 88 cents for the Gloucester school, end quote. With their next teacher, whose name is unknown, the school continued donating, with $3 noted in June 1898. Mary C. Carter was listed as the teacher for the 1899-1900 school year. The leadership of the Gloucester School addressed the local community at the Dragon Schoolhouse on Thanksgiving Day, 1899. The notice in the Gloucester Messenger stated, quote, Miss Mary C. Carter is teaching here and keeping very busy among the people, as well as in the schoolroom. The exercises of the day were good. Reverend Frank Page was present and delivered an address. The people in this part of the county are striving for better things and are very grateful for any advice, encouragement, and aid. Miss Mary A.J. Morris was listed as the teacher in a newspaper article from the Southside Sentinel for the 1903-1904 school year. However, the next year the paper reported issues with the teacher. This article says, quote, the dragon-colored school is yet closed and hereby hands a tale. An applicant for the position as teacher sends a diploma from an institution of learning and misleads the school officials into the act of licensing and employing him to teach. And so this would be the preceptor, and so this would-be preceptor came bowing and scraping and putting on the polish of the Chesterfield. But his postal has preceded him. And this notes, if you can read up on the screen, it's full of kind of spelling mistakes. It says, will you please have someone come meet me at H. Wharf, says he. I will pay for the trouble of getting someone. Shades of Moses. How we did blush, and how cutting was our humiliation, our chagrin, when we realized what a travesty on the high and noble calling of teaching we had committed. While the sequel is very patient, the young applicant and graduate was given the trouble to go back for another diploma. The school will be supplied next week. So this article does show kind of the attitude of the white school board towards black teachers at the time, as it's essentially a letter submitted by the school board making fun of the education of the black teacher. It's one of the only updates ever given on a black school to this newspaper at the time by the school board rather than the local communities, and is very unflattering. We do know from 1920s teacher applications where teachers had listed their previous positions that Lila J. Cook took over teaching in the fall of 1904. The teacher was Carrie E. Brooks from 1910 to 1911 school year, according to the Southern Workman. Then in 1915, we know the Dragon School was visited by the Gloucester Agricultural Association from a schedule of their county tour published in the Gloucester Historical Society newsletter. The teacher from 1915 to 1916 was Emma Travis, according to the Southern Workman. We also have this interesting map from USGS in 1916, which labels the school as Zion Branch School, the only place this name is ever used. And this map confused me for a long time as to the location of the Glens Dragon School early on in the research, because I assumed that this was the Zion Branch School. That's what's printed on the map. And the only thing I can think of is that, well, the USGS folks are not from around here, and they knew there was a school there, and they knew the Rip Creek there was Zion Branch, and they mislabeled it on the map. So there's then a bit of a gap in the historical record until 1921, when the Gloucester Gazette reported that the superintendent and trustees of Petsworth District would meet at the, quote, Glens Colored School to confer with the patrons of said school in regard to a new building for the place. This was then followed up a month later with a notice in the same paper that, quote, the colored patrons at Glens assure the officials that they would repair or build at this place. There is no more information on what happened. However, I can add that archaeologically they appear to have repaired, as there is no evidence that they ever rebuilt at the Glens site. The teacher at this time, according to teacher applications, was Eunice Richardson. Interestingly, Glens Dragon wasn't on the county's list of teachers from 1925. Although the school did not close for another few years. In 1927 to 1928, the teacher was Leslie Mayo, which we know from a letter to the school board from February 1928. The letter included $20 to pay for the extension of the term of the Glens Public School for half a month. It was signed by Mr. Robert Waller, president of the school league, Mrs. Bessie Richardson, the secretary, and Miss Leslie Mayo, the teacher. School terms were short at this time, often only 5 or 6 months, and parents had to pay if they wanted it extended beyond that. In January 1929, the school board minutes recorded their only mention of the Glenn's Dragon School. That, quote, "The board agreed to continue Glenn's Colored School for this term, but discontinue another session because of the fact that it does not maintain the required attendance." Typically, the required attendance by the state was around 20 pupils. The board authorized that the teacher be notified to this effect. However, while we can assume that the school was closed around April 1929, the land was never sold as it was still owned by the school board today. Technically, the county GIS states that it's still owned by the Petsworth District School Board, which ceased to exist in 1922, so it somehow never got transferred over to the Gloucester County School Board, unlike most of the other pieces of property. So that is mostly what we know about the history of the Glenn's Dragon School. It's not much, and we only have one photograph of the school, an aerial photo from 1937, almost a decade after the school closed. And it is a really, really blurry photo of the school's roof, not really of the school itself. So let me see if I can figure out how to look. Do you see this little square right here? That's the school, in between all the rest of the trees, and that's the only photograph that we have. So what about a school with more details? How does that kind of research pan out? And I'm purposely picking one to talk about today that is not in Ware District because those schools have too many details to fit into this talk because of the old school board minutes from the 19th century. So the Royal Oak or Cache School is a white school that was located in Cache, all around kind of the same intersection. The first mention of the school is in 1878 when the Petsworth School District purchased half an acre of land from Henry Roan on the intersection of the road leading from Freeport to Dragon Ordinary and the road leading from Freeport to Salem Church. However, this deed states, quote, that this piece of land being the same in which said schoolhouse is now located, which means that the school had begun in a rented building on the lot at some point earlier. Probably in 1871, but it could actually be earlier because there are a few schools that started out as private schools before the public school system was founded and then transitioned into public schools. We don't know what this one is because we don't have the records for that. There is then no mention of the school between 1878 and 1900, except for it being depicted on the 1885 Franklin map. An oral history with Benny B. Bland in the Family Tree Searcher stated that around 1900, Mary Lizzie Fitzhugh was the teacher at the Royal Oak School at Cache. She was quickly replaced by Virginia Gates after Miss Fitzhugh had to return to Baltimore due to family illness. Miss Gates was listed as being the teacher for the 1901-1902 school year in the Southside Sentinel. And a second article from the same paper states that, quote, "Our little teacher from the foreign lands arrived just in time to open Royal Oak School last Monday morning." However, I do not know what the foreign lands means, if that just means someplace else in the state, a different state, or was she really from, like, abroad? Don't know. The same paper reports that Inez Rowe was the teacher from 1903 until 1905. The teacher in 1908 was Olivia Bridges. A photograph of the school from that year was turned into a postcard, and an update on the school written on the back states that, quote, "The school has 29 on the roll, but the measles have all the rest at home. So it appears as a small school when really it is a very large one," end quote. The photo shows a teacher and only 12 students. So around 1908, the school moved into a rented building. A 1913 article in the Virginia Journal of Education described how they achieved their new schoolhouse. Quote, 7 years ago, the Board of Trustees were persuaded to accept an offer made to them to use a building adjoining the same school lot free of rent. A 2-room school was opened therein, with 2 first-class teachers who knew how to organize it, how to teach, how to draw, end quote. This article included a photo of the first Cache school abandoned with posters all over it, which is what is shown here. It's not the best quality because it was a publication. This was how photos were printed in 1913, but you can kind of see very interestingly that there's a whole bunch of posters on the outside of the building. Unfortunately, we don't have quite good enough definition to see what they were posters of. A photograph of students was taken in 1909 and shows 10 students, although it appears to be of a baseball team, not the entire school. In February 1910, it was reported that there was an oyster supper at the school to raise money for a new school building. A second oyster supper was then held the next month, and they also had homemade candy and refreshments. The 1912 Folks map shows that it was a 2-room school. Finally, in 1913, a third cash school was opened. The article in the Virginia Journal of Education describes the school as, quote, "It soon became apparent the 2-room school was inadequate. Again, the board was implored for additional room, and the reply was no money." This was strictly true, but in the spirit of progress, like Banquo's ghost, quote, "would not drown," and under the leadership of a noble woman, who, by the way, is a convert to public schools, with her husband, frequent meetings of the citizens and patrons were held, and the results were that 2 acres of land adjoining the old school lot were obtained, upon which 2 buildings, one a dwelling and the other a store. These were placed together under the direction of an experienced builder who remodeled them into the present building, containing 4 schoolrooms and besides an assembly room, closets, etc. This is shown not for its architectural beauty, but as a monument to the zeal rightly directed to cooperation and to personal sacrifice of time, money, and ease for the public good. Not a cent of public funds was used, billed, completed, and deeded to the Board of Trustees, only asking, "Give us a school in which the children of our neighborhood may have a chance." In it is now a faculty who have caught the same spirit and are maintaining therein a high school course of students, which Department of Public Education will be asked to examine during the present term. The cornerstone was laid October 31st. And so this is a photograph of the new school that was built out of the 2 building and their students. Billy Bland's oral history continued to provide information on the school. So around 1915, he said that the classes were held in what was formerly Mr. Duval's store, giving some more details on where the store came from. That Mr. Peter DeShazo was principal, and they taught algebra, geometry, English, and Latin. And then a woman named Miss Gibson taught agriculture, history, and a few other subjects. So this is one of the earliest high schools in the county. Also in 1915, the Agricultural Association visited, as did Superintendent R.A. Folks, who described the school as doing, quote, credible work. We know from the Gloucester newspaper that the teachers from 1916 and 1917 were Addie Bird, Christine Fitzhugh, and Dare White. In 1917, the students gave a play called Professor James at the commencement ceremony. They also organized a Red Cross auxiliary during World War I. In 1917, the USGS map shows the school's new location at Cache. We then get a lot of newspaper updates with the start of the publication of the Gloucester Gazette. Cache School was one of the first ones to start putting updates in, and then we're doing like kind of weekly updates there for a good while. So, just a quick overview of some of the selection of these. I think we put almost all of them in the book, but I'm only going to go through a few. They included multiple plays, an outbreak of scarlet fever in December 1919, Halloween entertainments yearly, more oyster suppers, bazaars, the organization of a literary society in 1919, cancellations of school due to snow, the organization of a girls' basketball league in 1920, graduation ceremonies, raising money for the Near East Relief Fund all through the 1920s, selling Christmas seals to raise money for tuberculosis in 1924 and 1926. A 4-H club was started in 1925. A vaccination clinic was held at the school in 1925 after vaccines were mandated by state law for school admission. We also have some information on teachers. They included M.S. Harcum, Miss Meredith, Miss Hudson between 1919 and 1920. Miss Betty Kemp from 1919 until 1925. Miss Farrenholt and Christine Fitzhugh were teachers from 1921 to 1922. Lesbia Brown and Dorothy Smith were 7th and 8th grade teachers from 1922 to 1923. Lucy Kemp taught from 1923 to 1924. And Mary German was the only teacher at the school from 1925 to 1926, showing that it had shrunk down from this high school back to a one-room school. And Gertrude Yates was the last teacher from 1926 until 1927. A school wagon, so the precursor for school bus, just like a wagon pulled by horses, was established in October 1919, which aided students arriving at the school. They also got a graffinola in October 1919, which is some sort of thing that played music. The schoolyard was cleared and wood hauled in January 1920. An amusing update from February 1920 stated, quote, "We felt the earth shake several times Monday afternoon, and upon investigating we found that some of the high school girls had slipped and fallen on the ice." There was a meeting held in October 1921 to discuss combining the Cash and St. Andrew's School, and despite its name, St. Andrew's was another public school in the county. The School League, an organization of parents and students, parents and teachers, was founded in 1921. In October 1922, we learned that, in 1922, we learned through a combination of the Gloucester Gazette articles and school board minutes that the School League dug a well and the school board installed a pump because their previous watering system was inconvenient. Also in 1922, the school board finally purchased the land the school was built on from T.E. Duval, containing 1.5 acres. So they were on rented land for a good portion of time. In 1924, the high school and 7th grade students from Cash were sent to Botetourt as long as the parents would provide transportation for them. We know that in October 1923, enrollment of the Cash school was 21 students. In 1926, a special meeting of the school board was held to debate the future of the Cash school. It was decided that the school would stay open as long as they could maintain an average attendance of 20 students. However, at a meeting a month later in October, they decided to send a single 7th grade student at Cash to Botetourt. And finally, in November 1926, the Cash school was closed, quote, November 30th, due to the fact that it is not meeting the required average. A wagon will be provided to take the students from Cash to New Upton School. However, the school did not actually close then. A bill from 1927 to the school board from Cash School asks for reimbursement as the teacher Gertrude Yates purchased a rope, a bucket, and a dipper for water, a stovepipe, a broom, and an axe from Roan's store. And another school board minute entry from March 1927 indicates additional meetings were held to determine if parents wanted the Cash and New Upton schools to stay open or if they prefer to send their children to Botetourt. No results of this meeting are noted, but this is the last mention of the Cash school, and it appears that the children were sent to Botetourt the next year. The school term is noted to have closed April 8th in the Gloucester Gazette, with attorney C.G. Jones giving the closing address. Finally, in October 1928, the school board said they were going to investigate selling the Cash school lot, although there's no record of it ever being sold. It evidently was, as it is in private ownership now and not owned by the school board. So, well, that was a little condensed so that this does not go on forever. I think this is a good example of how various schools have different amounts of detail and the types of sources of these, because they're very much local community institutions for the 19th and early 20th century. So what got put in the newspapers by the school, what else other kinds of records are for them, and also the biases of the newspaper. So the white schools got way more updates than the black schools in the newspaper. Unless it is during the time period when the Gloucester Letter and Gloucester Messenger were in publication. And so that is my presentation for you all today. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I think we're going to do some questions now if anyone has any.
We have a couple minutes for some Q&A if anyone has a burning question. I know, here we go up front here.
Did you run into anything on the preschool at Next Zero?
No, because that was all closed before the time period I only started my research in 1871.
Prior to the Gloucester Training School, later the T.C. Walker School, was there ever, I heard you talk about plumbing and whatnot in the white schools. Was there ever any plumbing in the black schools prior to training school?
The training school had some plumbing before the T.C. Walker School was built in 1951. However, it often seems like it was broken. So because it was there doesn't mean it was always working. There's evidence of electricity at some of the other schools, but not plumbing.
Colleen, of the schools that you had on the map, how many are still standing?
I think there's 4. So we got Woodville.
Okay.
The Smithfield School is a house. The Locust Grove School is an abandoned house. And there's, I think, okay, I'm not from Gloucester. I can never pronounce it. If it's Schley or Schley, I can never know. Okay, that school is also still standing as a house. So that is 4 that I know of.
Thank you.
The Harkham store, it's my understanding, was a school.
Okay.
And I was wondering if that was the new Upton school.
It might have been. So some of these are the ones that I was aware of, and this is a great opportunity for me to get other information from people that might not be in the documents. So some of the issue is trying to figure out what buildings used to be schools, is we don't always have a photo of it when it was a school, so it's hard to kind of to tell, but community memory is a great way to try to gather that information.
What do you know about Brooksville?
A good amount, but not a ton.
Do you know when it closed?
I think Brooksville closed when the training school opened.
When the training school opened?
The Brooksville school and the Poplar school
Yeah.
combined into the training school.
I'm sad that the road went through there was Brooksville Road now, and they took the name of Crockett's and stuck there, and now we don't have Brooksville Road from the Brooks family.
Unfortunate.
Who did that?
Anybody else? Here we go, up front.
I have a question about when you actually presented your thesis to your, to who?
Whoever.
Yeah, to whoever. Did they have many questions of you?
Yes, but this wasn't my thesis work. So my thesis work was very much the archaeology of these three schools. So this was a side project.
Okay.
But yeah, they had a lot of questions for me.
Okay.
Well, let's give Colleen another round of applause.